Hello, I'm Tylah Tully. Globally, there are 15 million people who experience a stroke each year. And when a stroke strikes, it can cause lasting brain damage, long-term disability, and even death. Today I'm joined by Argenica Therapeutics Managing Director Liz Dallimore to tell us more about strokes and their impact. Liz, thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I think a good place to start is, in simple terms, what is happening to somebody's brain when they suffer a stroke, and what are the different triggers for strokes to occur?
Yeah, so there's actually two types of stroke, so that's probably the kind of key differentiator. The main type of stroke that affects 85% of all strokes is an ischemic stroke, and this is caused by a blood clot in a blood vessel in the brain. So what is happening during an ischemic stroke is, if you can think about that blood clot lodging in the blood vessel, it's going to stop blood flow to that part of the brain. Brain cells can last all of about 3 seconds without that blood, because the blood produces oxygen, nutrients to that brain cell essentially. So when that blood flow is restricted, the brain sort of tries to protect itself, and it releases a chemical called glutamate. But unfortunately, when that chemical is released, it also causes brain cells to start dying as a sort of protective mechanism for that part of the brain. Unfortunately, if the clot isn't removed, that brain injury just sort of cascades and proliferates out into the brain. So really in stroke, the aim is to really get that sort of blood clot removed in terms of the current treatments.
So how common are strokes in Australia and overseas, and are those numbers increasing?
Yeah, so at the moment what we know is that in Australia someone suffers a stroke every 11 minutes. So, and that has actually increased from data that we have 5 years prior, where it was every 19 minutes. So we can see that the incidence in stroke is definitely increasing. If we look to the US, every 45 seconds someone is suffering a stroke. And the prevalence in these big kind of global jurisdictions, the US, China, is definitely increasing. So in China now we know that stroke is the #1 killer. It's actually overtaken heart attack. And unfortunately the prevalence is increasing in younger people. So, and that's for a number of reasons, largely due to lifestyle factors. So it's quite terrifying in that, prevalence is increasing globally, but also increasing in younger people.
So what is the standard medical response to a stroke, and what do the outcomes for patients tend to look like?
Yeah, so for the clot-causing strokes, the ischemic strokes that I've been talking about, the current standard of care treatment is to try to remove that clot. So that has to be done in a hospital setting, and those patients either have a drug which is administered usually in the emergency department. That's an IV infusion, so sort of put into a blood vessel in the arm and delivered a drug that dissolves the clot. So these are called lysis drugs. The problem with lysis drugs is that they can only be administered within sort of 3 to 4 hours post-stroke onset. Anything beyond that, and their side effects are just too detrimental for those patients. The other procedure is known as an endovascular thrombectomy, and this is where a specialist neurointerventional radiologist will put a little device into the patient's either their wrist or their groin, actually sort of maneuver it up into the brain and suck out that clot. So this works really well for patients that have a large clot in one of the large vessels that are kind of going into the brain. So they're the two procedures at the moment that are available to ischemic stroke patients.
So Argenica is developing a neuroprotective treatment for victims of stroke and is currently conducting a phase 2 clinical trial, the results of which are due to be published in the coming weeks. How does the Argenica treatment differ from the current standard treatment, and what are you hoping to show in this trial?
Yeah, so it's a really exciting time for Argenica. We have what's known as a neuroprotective treatment, and this is really like an adjunct therapy to that thrombectomy procedure that I was talking about before, that sort of clot retrieval or removal procedure. So what our drug does is it's actually quite different. So we're not targeting the clot per se. What we're doing is protecting brain cells. So as I said at the beginning, what happens in stroke is you get this sort of proliferation out or cascading out of brain injury, and our drug is trying to stop that. So the benefit of that, it actually buys a patient time to get the treatment that they need to essentially remove the clot. So absolute game changer. Neuroprotection is sort of the holy grail in stroke treatment. So that's sort of what we focused on. And the other benefit of our drug is when you do have this clot retrieval or clot removal procedure, you can get secondary injury in the brain, which is caused just by the force of the blood rushing back into the brain. So we're hoping to show that secondary benefit of the drug in protecting against that secondary injury.
And assuming a positive phase 2 result, what are the next steps for AGN in moving your drug candidate forward, and what are the commercial opportunities for the company?
Yeah, so we're sort of following a very standard clinical development path. So the main thing that we're looking at, the biggest hurdle that we need to get over in this phase 2 trial from a regulatory and clinical development program is to show safety. So that is kind of a go, no-go decision in our trial. So we want to first and foremost show that the drug is safe to administer to stroke patients, and that's really important in any neurology drug development. And then we want to obviously show in the trial that it's working at protecting that brain injury, and we do that by scanning the patients and looking at the extent of brain injury in their brains via that imaging. So if that all looks good, we'll move into the next stage of development, which will be what we call either a phase 2B study. So that's sort of expanding the trial and really showing exactly where the drug works, and then going into that registrational phase 3 trial after that. So if all goes to plan, we could have a drug on the market sort of by the end of 2029, 2030, so which is not that far away, which is exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, as you've said, there's a large unmet need, so we'll be watching closely for those results.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much.
For more ASX news and analysis, subscribe below.